Hey guys, this starts your next to last unit before the end of your biology course. So we're going to talk about ecology in this unit. Let's start off by defining the word ecology. Ecology is the study of organisms and their interaction between living and non-living things in their environment. So we're going to talk about everything from animals and the way they interact to the environment and how they interact with the environment. And we could really spend an entire course just talking about ecology, probably multiple courses. So we're just going to hit the highlights of the topic in this class. So ecology and the study of ecology is divided into different levels of organization. We start off with the individual, which is an individual living organism. It could be an individual blade of grass, it could be an entire moose, it could be a human, or it could be a bacteria, a single bacteria in an area. So an individual living thing is the very first level of organization. A population is a group of the same species that live in one area. So it would be the number of gray squirrels that live in the area around Eastside High School. That would be the population. The community would be a group of different species that live together in one area. So it wouldn't only be the number of gray squirrels, but it would be the number of rabbits, the number of humans, the number of foxes, the number of blades of grass, different species that live together in one area. It doesn't have to all be like species of animals or species of plants. It includes the both of those living together in one area. The next level is an ecosystem, which is all the organisms as well as their non-living things in an area. So let's again use our example of East Side. It would be all of the living things, all of the plants, all of the animals, humans, so on and so forth, and the sources of water, the air that they breathe, the ground that the grass grows in, all the components of the soil. All of that makes up an ecosystem of a given area. The next is a little bigger. It is the biome. And this is a major regional or global community of organisms. We have different biomes that are characterized by climate, animals and plants that traditionally thrive there because there will be similarities as you move across the globe. The organisms will be different, but there will be similarities in climate patterns and the types of plants and animals that live in an area. And then the final level is called the biosphere. This is the interaction of lithosphere or soil, geosphere, biosphere, living things, hydrosphere, water, and atmosphere, air. So, and then geosphere is things like rocks and things like that. But the interaction of all of those things and how they make up the earth that we live in. So we're going to transition to talking about abiotic versus biotic factors. So let's kind of break those words down before we start. That word biotic, it has the same prefix as biology, and if biology means the study of, L-O-G-Y is study of, and bio is living things, biotic would be living something. So biotic factors are living things like plants, animals, fungi, and bacteria in an area. And then your abiotic factors, A means not, bio means living, so abiotic is non-living things like moisture, temperature, wind, sunlight, and soil. These are all things, both biotic and abiotic factors, impact an organism and their ability to thrive in their environment. Biodiversity. So bio again means living, and diversity means the range of different things. If we're talking about the diversity of a school, we're talking about the number of people that are from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. So biodiversity is the assortment or variety of living things in an ecosystem. So I have an example for you. There's an area of the world called the rainforest, and it has a very high amount of biodiversity because a lot of species of animals call the rainforest home. So The rainforest has a high amount of biodiversity, but we could contrast that with the desert, where the level of biodiversity is going to be lower because it's harder to live in the desert ecosystem than it is the rainforest, where there's lots of rain, temperature is more ideal. So the biodiversity levels are going to change as we talk about different biomes across the world. A keystone species is a species that has a very large effect on an ecosystem, an unusually large effect. So there's a really important one in today's world that I'm going to talk about, and it is the honeybee. So the honeybee is one of those organisms that, especially in this part of the United States, is starting to die off. It has a competitor that has come in that does not do the same things that it does, which means that, and the competitor is better than it in a lot of ways, and it's starting to kill the honeybee off, which is a problem. And then other things are happening, like just earlier this year or end of last year in South Carolina, there was a pesticide that was sprayed from an airplane that is normally sprayed from the backs of cars, but it was sprayed to help deal with the mosquito population. Well, what it did was it wiped out the entirety of a honeybee population in a given area. Well, the honeybee is important because it pollinates a lot of different plants, and to pollinate means it helps it spread its genetic material. Bees help increase genetic diversity in the populations in an ecosystem, and that's an incredibly important job that it plays in an area, because if plants can't reproduce in the fields, then sometimes food levels go down, and then the price of corn goes up, and it has a whole host of effects even on the human population just because of one species at the usually towards the bottom level of the ecosystem or in the food chain. All right, energy in ecosystems. All energy in all of living things starts from the sun. The sun gives energy to producers like plants that make their own food. We also call those autotrophs. Producers are eaten by consumers, and so that consumers eat other things to live. Those are called heterotrophs. And then decomposers and detritivores break down matter in order to be recycled. And then just like a proper cycle, the decomposer and detritivores give their energy back to the producers or the autotrophs. So a food chain is kind of like what we just saw there. So the sun would provide energy to grass. The grasshopper eats the grass. The mouse eats the grasshopper, and the owl eats the mouse. So that's a food chain. It's a sequence of links that are supported by their sequence of species linked by their feeding relationship. So everything together based on what it eats. Now, there are a few types of consumers we want to distinguish between. So we called all consumers heterotrophs. So let's add some nuance here. You've probably heard some of these words before, but let's get a good review. So the first is an herbivore. This is an organism that eats only plants. It does not eat anything else, just plants. So kind of like the deer. The second is a carnivore. It is an organism that eats only animals, like a lion. Third is an omnivore. This is what humans would be. They eat both plants and animals. So the monkey you see there is eating an apple, but he also eats other organisms. So he's considered an omnivore. The next is a detritivore. And this we kind of briefly hit on the slide of energy flow through an ecosystem. But a detritivore is an organism that feeds on dead organic matter or detritus in the soil. This is slightly different from a decomposer. A decomposer is a type of detritivore that then takes organic matter and makes it into simpler things. Remember, organic is anything that contains carbon, and our decomposers are useful in creating soil and getting those nutrients that are found in the environment into a form that can be used by all organisms, especially at the producer level. A trophic level is the level of nourishment in a food chain. So in the example I gave you with the grass, grasshopper, mouse, and the owl, each one of those has a different trophic level. They're at a different level of nourishment in the food chain. It always starts with a producer, then moves to primary consumers, which are herbivores. Sometimes you could substitute in an omnivore at that level, but primary consumers are herbivores. Secondary consumers are carnivores. Tertiary consumers are organisms that eat the secondary consumer. So in our food chain that I showed you earlier, the producer would have been the grass, the grasshopper. The consumer is the owl. Quick note about omnivores. Omnivores are a consumer, but you're an omnivore, and there wouldn't be anything other than that at the top of the food chain because nothing eats humans. We're not going to go into the realm of, well, T-Rex does. So we would be the primary and the tertiary consumer if we're sitting and eating a salad. All right, an energy pyramid is a diagram that compares energy used by the different levels of the different trophic levels, so the different levels of a food chain. This helps us to see what kind of energy is available and how it is distributed among the trophic levels, so how each level varies in the amount of energy they have. And biomass is how we get this energy measurement, and it's the measure of the total dry mass of the organisms in an area. So the total mass of all of the organisms in an area, the total dry mass of grass, which would mean you get all the water out of it. And this is what an energy pyramid looks like. So remember I told you that the energy always starts with the sun and feeds the primary producers. And then you'll see each level of the trophic, or each trophic level, gets smaller in the amount of energy that it contains because each level energy is lost at the heat. Primary producers use energy to do photosynthesis. Primary consumers use energy to carry on all their life processes and so on and so forth. And then all energy and all waste from each of those trophic levels goes to the decomposers who recycle the nutrients and feed it back into the primary producers. Quick note, over here on the right hand side you'll see quick note about energy in an energy pyramid. Only 10% of the energy available at one level is available at the next trophic level. So there's 100% of the energy at the primary producer, but only 10% of the energy at the primary consumer. Conversion of biomass from one level to the next level is very inefficient, which is why we have that loss of 10% of energy or 90% of energy at every level. And the last thing for these notes talks about a food web. A food web is a combination of many different food chains because in the ecosystem with the owl and the mouse and the grasshopper and the grass, there's probably a lot more than just the grasshopper that eats the grass. There's probably a lot more than the mouse that is eaten by the owl. So the food web puts all of those things in a given area together in order to make a comprehensive view of the ecosystem.